Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stirred the massive pot of vegetable soup. The makeshift kitchen he had built behind the abandoned warehouse wasn't much to look at, but it served its purpose. Steam rose from several large containers, filling the air with the rich aroma of herbs and spices that reminded him of his grandmother's cooking back on Earth. 3 months had passed since he arrived on Kepler Station, a forgotten outpost on the edge of human space. The mining operation had shut down years ago, leaving behind empty buildings and desperate families who couldn't afford passage elsewhere. Marcus had come here as part of a humanitarian relief mission, but when the funding dried up and his colleagues returned to Earth, he made a choice that surprised everyone, including himself. He stayed. The sound of small footsteps approaching made him smile. They always arrived at exactly noon like clockwork. Marcus turned to see a group of 7 alien children emerging from the shadows between the buildings. Their species was called the Vexari, though he had learned that from old database entries rather than from them. The children never spoke much, communicating mostly through a series of clicks and soft humming sounds that he had begun to understand meant hunger, gratitude, and sometimes what he thought might be affection. The eldest of the group, a girl with silvery skin and large violet eyes, stepped forward first. Her name was something like Zira in the human pronunciation, though the actual sound was far more musical. She was perhaps 12 in human years, though her people aged differently. Behind her came 6 others, ranging from what appeared to be toddlers to pre-teens, all sharing the same distinctive features: elongated limbs, skin that shifted between silver and pale blue depending on the light, and those remarkable eyes that seemed to hold depths of intelligence far beyond their apparent years. Marcus had first encountered them rummaging through garbage containers behind the station's few remaining shops. They had been so thin their ribs showed through their skin, their clothes nothing more than tattered rags. The sight had broken something inside him. That very day he had used his remaining credits to buy ingredients and started cooking. "Good afternoon, my friends," Marcus said softly, ladling the soup into recycled containers. The children approached cautiously, as they always did, though their trust in him had grown considerably over the weeks. Zira made a complex series of clicks that he had come to understand meant thank you in their language. As he handed out the food, Marcus noticed that little Kef, the youngest of the group, was limping more severely than usual. The child couldn't have been more than 4 years old, with skin that maintained a permanent pale blue tinge that suggested poor health. Marcus knelt down and gently examined the small leg, finding what appeared to be an infected cut. "We need to clean this up, little one," he murmured, knowing the child couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone conveyed care, rather than threat. From his medical kit he retrieved antiseptic and bandages, carefully tending to the wound while the other children watched with those impossibly expressive eyes. What struck Marcus most about these children wasn't their obvious poverty or their alien appearance, but their behavior. Despite their hunger and difficult circumstances, they shared everything equally. If there wasn't enough food for all of them, the older ones would give their portions to the younger. They communicated in whispers and stayed close together, clearly a family unit despite having no adults present. He had tried asking around the station about their parents, but the few remaining residents either claimed ignorance or quickly changed the subject. The general consensus seemed to be that the Vexari were refugees from some distant conflict, though nobody could or would provide details. The children appeared to be completely on their own. After the meal, as always, the children helped him clean up. Zira had somehow learned to operate the portable dishwasher he had salvaged, while the others organized utensils and swept the area. Their gratitude was evident in every action, but there was something else in their behavior that puzzled him. Despite their obvious destitution, they carried themselves with a strange dignity, almost like nobility trying to maintain composure in reduced circumstances. As the afternoon wound down, the children prepared to leave for whatever shelter they had found in the abandoned sections of the station. But today Zira did something different. She approached Marcus and, after a series of soft clicks, reached into a fold of her ragged clothing and withdrew something small and metallic. The object was no larger than a coin, but it seemed to catch and reflect light in impossible ways. Strange symbols were etched into its surface, and as Marcus looked at it, he could swear the markings were shifting, rearranging themselves in patterns that hurt his eyes to follow. Zira pressed it into his palm and made what he had learned was their gesture of deepest respect, touching her forehead with both hands. "I can't take this," Marcus protested gently, trying to hand it back. But Zira stepped away, shaking her head, and made a series of urgent clicks that somehow conveyed the importance of his keeping the gift. The other children had gathered around them, and all were making the same respectful gesture. As they departed, disappearing into the maze of abandoned corridors and broken-down machinery that made up the forgotten sections of Kepler Station, Marcus stood holding the strange object. Under the fading light of the station's artificial sun, it seemed to pulse with an inner warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature around him. That night, as he prepared for sleep in his small quarters, Marcus placed the object on his nightstand and wondered about the children's story. Where had they come from? How had they ended up alone on this forgotten station? And why did something as simple as feeding hungry children feel like it was part of something much larger than he could understand? Outside his window, the vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, filled with stars and secrets that seemed suddenly closer than they had ever been before. The next morning brought an unusual commotion to Kepler Station. Marcus woke to the sound of heavy footsteps in the corridors outside his quarters, accompanied by voices speaking in the clipped, professional tones of military personnel. He dressed quickly and stepped outside to find the station buzzing with activity for the first time in months. A squad of soldiers in gleaming armor moved through the central plaza, their equipment bearing insignia he didn't recognize. These weren't human forces, nor were they from any of the common alien species he knew from his travels. Their armor was a deep midnight blue that seemed to absorb light, and their weapons looked more advanced than anything in the human arsenal. Station Administrator Torres, a tired-looking woman who usually spent her days managing the handful of remaining residents, was speaking rapidly with what appeared to be the squad's commanding officer. Marcus caught fragments of their conversation as he approached: missing persons, unauthorized presence, security concerns. "Mr. Chen," Torres called out when she spotted him, "these officers need to speak with you." The commanding officer turned toward Marcus, and he found himself looking at a face that was humanoid, but distinctly alien. The being's skin had a slight metallic sheen, and its eyes were a startling gold color that seemed to see far too much. When it spoke, its voice carried an odd harmonic quality that made the words seem to resonate inside Marcus's chest. "I am Commander Vextar of the Galactic Security Division," the officer said. "We understand you have been in contact with a group of unregistered aliens on this station." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "I've been helping some hungry children. Is that a crime?" "That depends entirely on who those children are," Vextar replied. "These individuals you've been feeding are wanted in connection with a serious security matter. We need you to tell us everything you know about them." "They're just kids," Marcus protested. "They can't be more than 12 years old, the oldest one. They're hungry and homeless, and I've been making sure they don't starve." "What kind of security threat could children possibly pose?" Commander Vextar exchanged a look with one of his subordinates that Marcus couldn't interpret. "Mr. Chen, I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation. These are not ordinary children. Their presence here represents a significant breach of interstellar security protocols." Over the next hour, Marcus found himself questioned extensively about his interactions with the children. Where had he first seen them? What did they say to him? Had they given him anything or asked him to do anything unusual? The questions came rapid fire, and Marcus answered honestly, though he found himself reluctant to mention the strange metallic object Zira had given him the day before. When the questioning finally ended, Commander Vextar delivered an order that made Marcus's blood run cold. "You are hereby forbidden from having any further contact with these individuals. If you see them, you are to notify station security immediately. Any attempt to warn them or assist them further will be considered obstruction of a galactic security investigation." "You can't be serious," Marcus said. "They're children. They need food, medical care. The youngest one has an infected wound that needs attention. These individuals are extremely dangerous, Mr. Chen, regardless of their apparent age. Your cooperation in this matter is not optional." As the security forces dispersed throughout the station to begin their search, Marcus retreated to his quarters with his mind racing. Everything about this felt wrong. The children he had been feeding showed no signs of being dangerous. They were polite, grateful, and clearly struggling to survive. If anything, they seemed to go out of their way to avoid causing any trouble. But something about Commander Vextar's reaction troubled him more than the prohibition itself. The officer had seemed genuinely concerned, even frightened. What could 7 homeless children possibly have done to warrant this level of response from what appeared to be an elite military unit? As noon approached, Marcus faced an impossible choice. The children would be expecting their daily meal as they had for weeks. If he wasn't there, they would go hungry. But if he was caught helping them, he would face serious legal consequences, and possibly worse. He made his decision. Marcus prepared the usual lunch, but this time he packed it into portable containers and took a circuitous route through the station's maintenance tunnels. He had explored these passages during his first weeks on Kepler Station, and he knew they connected to the abandoned sections where the children seemed to live. When he emerged near their usual meeting place, he found them already waiting. But something was different. The children were more alert than usual, their large eyes darting constantly toward the shadows. Zira approached him with obvious relief, but her manner was tense. As he distributed the food, Marcus tried to communicate the danger they were in. He pointed toward the main station and made threatening gestures, hoping they would understand that soldiers were looking for them. Zira's reaction confirmed his worst fears. She made a series of rapid, distressed clicks and gathered the other children closer to her. Little Kef, the youngest, seemed especially frightened. The child pressed close to Marcus, making soft sounds that were unmistakably pleas for protection. Marcus knelt down and checked the wound he had treated the day before. It was healing well, but the child was clearly traumatized by whatever had driven them to hide on this forgotten station. As the children prepared to leave, Zira approached Marcus one more time. She pointed to herself, then to the others, then made a gesture toward the depths of the abandoned station. Finally, she touched the spot where Marcus's shirt covered the pocket containing the metallic object she had given him. Her meaning was clear. They were in grave danger, and somehow that small artifact was important. Marcus watched them disappear into the shadows, and for the first time since arriving on Kepler Station, he felt truly afraid. Not for himself, but for 7 children who were clearly running from something terrible, and who had trusted him enough to share what might be their last hope. That evening, as security forces continued their systematic search of the station, Marcus sat in his quarters staring at the strange metallic object. In the artificial twilight of the station's night cycle, it seemed to pulse with an inner light that grew stronger whenever he thought about the children. Whatever this thing was and whatever those children were running from, he was now part of their story whether he wanted to be or not. 3 days passed without any sign of the children. Marcus continued his daily routine, but the makeshift kitchen behind the warehouse felt empty and purposeless. The security forces had established a permanent presence on the station, with patrols moving through every sector around the clock. Commander Vextar had questioned him twice more, each time pressing harder for information about the children's whereabouts. On the 4th morning, Marcus made a discovery that changed everything. While cleaning out old storage containers in the warehouse, he found a hidden compartment behind a loose wall panel. Inside was a collection of items that clearly belonged to the children. Spare clothing, a few personal belongings, and something that made his breath catch. It was a holographic projector, obviously of alien design, but functional enough that he could activate it with simple touch controls. The image that materialized above the device made him step backward in shock. A woman's face appeared in the blue-tinged light. Unmistakably Vexari, but possessed of a presence and authority that commanded immediate attention. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with the same silver skin and violet eyes as the children, but her features held a maturity and power that spoke of high rank and enormous responsibility. She wore what appeared to be formal regalia, decorated with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The recording began to speak in the Vexari language, but the projector apparently had translation capabilities. A mechanical voice overlaid the woman's words with standard galactic. "My dearest children, if you are seeing this message, then our worst fears have been realized and I have been unable to return to you as promised." Marcus felt his legs go weak. This was clearly the children's mother, but something about her bearing, her clothing, and the formal nature of the recording suggested she was far more than just another refugee. "I know you are frightened and alone, but you must remember who you are. You are the heirs of the Vexari Empire, children of the Empress who has ruled for 3 centuries. The rebellion that seeks to overthrow our family will stop at nothing to capture you. For they know that while you live, their claim to power remains illegitimate. The hologram flickered, and the woman's composed expression cracked slightly, revealing a mother's desperate love beneath the imperial facade. I have hidden you on this remote station, where no one would think to look for members of the royal family. The human population is small and isolated, and I hoped you could remain safe until I could reclaim our throne. Marcus sank to his knees as the implications hit him like a physical blow. For months, he had been feeding the children of an alien empress. The hungry refugees he had taken pity on were actually the rightful heirs to what he now realized must be one of the most powerful governments in the galaxy. The recording continued. The artifact I gave to Zira contains the genetic codes that prove your identity and your right to rule. Guard it with your lives, for it is the key to everything we have fought to preserve. If something happens to me, find someone you can trust absolutely. Someone whose heart is pure enough to understand that protecting children matters more than politics or profit. The image of the Empress looked directly out of the hologram, and Marcus felt as though she were speaking directly to him across time and space. To whoever is caring for my children in my absence, know that you have my eternal gratitude. The Vixari Empire does not forget its debts, and when I return to power, your kindness will be rewarded beyond measure. The hologram faded, leaving Marcus alone in the dusty warehouse with his world completely transformed. Everything made sense now. The children's strange dignity despite their poverty, their obvious intelligence, the way they carried themselves like nobility in exile. The security forces weren't hunting down ordinary refugees. They were searching for the heirs to an interstellar empire. And he, a simple humanitarian aid worker from Earth, had been feeding them soup and bandaging their wounds without having any idea that he was harboring galactic royalty. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped him back to the present. Marcus quickly shut down the hologram and hid the projector back in its compartment, but not before he heard voices in the corridor outside. Commander Vextar was speaking to his subordinates, and their words made Marcus's blood freeze. The thermal scans have detected recent habitation in this sector. Deploy search teams to every building. If the targets have been hiding here, there will be evidence. Marcus moved quickly but quietly to a window and peered out. The entire warehouse district was surrounded by security forces. Wherever the children were hiding now, it wouldn't be long before they were found. And when that happened, Marcus realized with growing horror, they would probably be killed. The rebellion the Empress had mentioned wouldn't want to take any chances with potential claimants to the throne. 7 children who had never hurt anyone would be eliminated simply because of who their mother was, unless someone helped them first. Marcus made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. He had spent his life helping people in need, and he wasn't about to stop now just because the stakes had suddenly become galactic rather than personal. These children had trusted him, had shared their food and their gratitude and their most precious secret. Now it was his turn to protect them. He gathered supplies quickly: food, medical equipment, portable power cells, and everything else he could carry. Then he activated the emergency beacon he had been given when he first arrived on the station, but he modified its frequency to broadcast on channels that only other human ships would monitor. If the children were going to survive, they needed to get off Kepler Station. And if Marcus was going to help them escape, he needed to become something he had never been before. Not just a humanitarian, but a rebel fighting against one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. As he prepared to venture into the abandoned tunnels to find the children, Marcus touched the metallic artifact in his pocket. It seemed warmer now, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. 7 children were counting on him, and somewhere in the vast galaxy, an empress who had trusted a stranger with her most precious treasures was hoping that her faith in human decency had not been misplaced. Marcus found the children in the deepest part of the abandoned mining complex, huddled together in a chamber that had once housed heavy excavation equipment. They were cold, hungry, and clearly terrified. When they saw him approaching with his pack of supplies, relief flooded their faces. But Zira immediately made urgent clicking sounds that he understood as warnings about the soldiers. "I know," Marcus whispered, even though he wasn't sure they could understand him. "We need to get you out of here." As he distributed food and checked on their condition, Marcus tried to think through their impossible situation. The entire station was under lockdown, with security forces conducting systematic searches. Even if they could somehow reach the docking bays, there were no civilian ships available, and stealing a military vessel was beyond his capabilities. But as he watched the children eat, Marcus remembered something important. The emergency beacon he had activated was specifically designed to summon human rescue ships. The frequency was monitored by several humanitarian organizations, including the one he had originally worked for. If any of those ships were within range, they would respond to a distress call from Kepler Station. The question was whether help would arrive before the children were discovered. Little Kef crawled into Marcus's lap while the others ate, and he found himself struck again by how much trust these small beings had placed in him. They had no way of knowing whether he understood their true identity, yet they continued to rely on his protection. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier now that he knew who they really were. Zira approached him as the others settled down to rest. She pointed to the artifact in his pocket, then to herself, then made a gesture that encompassed all the other children. Her meaning was clear. She wanted to know if he understood what the object represented. Marcus nodded slowly and carefully withdrew the metallic disc. In the dim light of their hiding place, it seemed to glow with its own inner fire. When Zira saw that he was handling it with appropriate reverence, she began to make soft, melodic sounds that he realized was probably their form of formal speech. Even without understanding the words, Marcus could hear the weight of ceremony in her voice. She was reciting something important, perhaps an oath or a traditional formula. When she finished, she touched the artifact with one finger, and it flared with brief, brilliant light before returning to its usual soft glow. The implications were staggering. Marcus was now officially recognized as the guardian of the rightful heirs to the Vexari Empire. These children had just made him their protector, in whatever formal ceremony their people used for such purposes. The responsibility was beyond anything he had ever imagined, but as he looked at their trusting faces, he knew he wouldn't back down. A distant sound made them all freeze. Footsteps were approaching through the tunnels, accompanied by the mechanical whir of scanning equipment. Commander Vextar's forces had reached the mining complex. Marcus gathered the children quickly and led them deeper into the excavation system, following maintenance shafts that led toward the station's outer hull. If his memory of the station schematics was correct, there should be emergency airlocks in this section, originally designed to allow miners to access external equipment. As they moved through the narrow passages, Marcus heard the security forces entering the chamber they had just vacated. Shouts echoed through the tunnels as the soldiers discovered signs of recent habitation. The search was getting closer. They reached the airlock section just as Marcus's modified emergency beacon received a response. The signal was weak but clear. A human cargo ship called the Determination was adjusting course to investigate the distress call. Estimated arrival time was 6 hours. 6 hours to stay hidden from the most advanced military force in the galaxy. Marcus led the children into the largest of the emergency chambers and sealed the door behind them. The space was designed to serve as a temporary shelter if the main station systems failed, so it had basic life support and communication equipment. More importantly, it was shielded and isolated enough that their presence might not register on standard scans. As they waited, Marcus tried to plan their next moves. Even if the Determination arrived safely, getting the children aboard would require getting past the security cordon around the station. Commander Vextar would certainly question any arriving vessels, and a humanitarian cargo ship would seem suspicious if it tried to leave with additional passengers. The solution came to him as he watched the children settling into the confined space with the quiet efficiency that spoke of their noble training. They needed to become invisible, at least temporarily, and Marcus knew exactly how to make that happen. Using the chamber's communication system, he began sending carefully coded messages to the approaching rescue ship. To anyone monitoring the transmissions, it would appear to be standard operational updates from a stranded humanitarian worker. But embedded in the technical language were instructions that any experienced rescue crew would recognize. He was requesting an emergency medical evacuation under humanitarian protocols that superseded normal security procedures. The patients were suffering from radiation exposure and required immediate transport to proper medical facilities. The condition was contagious enough to require full isolation protocols. meaning that security personnel would be reluctant to inspect the transport too closely. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only plan that had any chance of success. As the hours passed, the children showed remarkable composure for being so young. They understood that they were in terrible danger, but they remained calm and quiet, trusting in Marcus's protection. Zira even helped him care for the younger ones, demonstrating the kind of leadership qualities that would serve her well if she ever reclaimed her mother's throne. When the Determination finally docked with Kepler Station, Marcus was ready. He had used the chamber's medical supplies to create convincing symptoms of radiation sickness, pale skin, apparent weakness, and other signs that would discourage close examination. The children understood their roles instinctively, playing their parts with the natural acting ability that came from months of hiding their true identities. Commander Vextar did question the medical evacuation, but the ship's captain, a veteran humanitarian named Sarah Torres, played her part perfectly. She presented the medical emergency as routine, filled out the proper paperwork, and made it clear that any delays in treatment could result in the deaths of innocent civilians. As the Determination prepared to depart with its secret cargo, Marcus felt the metallic artifact pulse with warmth against his chest. 7 children who should have been growing up in palaces were instead fleeing for their lives, protected only by the kindness of strangers and the hope that somewhere in the galaxy, their mother was still fighting to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. The rebellion thought they had won by scattering the royal family, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the willingness of ordinary people to protect children in need, regardless of politics or power. And that mistake was going to cost them everything. The Determination had been traveling through hyperspace for 2 weeks when everything changed. Marcus had been helping Captain Torres tend to the children, who were recovering well from their ordeal on Kepler Station. They had their own quarters and were finally getting proper nutrition and medical care. For the first time since he had met them, they were beginning to act like normal children, playing quiet games and showing curiosity about the human ship. Marcus was teaching Zira basic English when the ship's communication array suddenly activated with an incoming transmission that made the entire hull vibrate. The signal was unlike anything he had ever experienced, carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to his consciousness. Captain Torres rushed to the bridge with Marcus following close behind. The main display showed a massive vessel approaching their position, its design unlike anything in human records. The ship was elegant and organic-looking, as if it had been grown rather than built. Its hull shifted between silver and deep blue, and energy patterns flowed across its surface like living lightning. "Unknown vessel," came a voice that carried the same harmonic qualities as the children's language. "You are carrying members of the Vexari royal family. You will surrender them immediately or face the consequences." Marcus felt his heart sink. They had been found. But then Zira appeared on the bridge, having somehow slipped past the security locks on her quarters. When she saw the alien ship on the display, her reaction was completely unexpected. Instead of fear, her face showed pure joy. She began making rapid, excited clicking sounds and gesturing toward the communication system. "Let her speak," Marcus urged Captain Torres, though he had no idea what the child intended to do. Torres activated the transmission array, and Zira began speaking in her native language. Her voice carried new authority and confidence, as if she were finally able to be herself after months of hiding. The response from the alien ship was immediate and dramatic. "Your Imperial Highness," the voice replied, now carrying tones of profound respect and relief. "We have searched every system in this sector. The Empress has been desperate to find you." Marcus watched in amazement as the entire situation transformed. The threatening alien vessel was not an enemy ship, but a rescue mission sent by the children's mother. The Empress had somehow learned of their location and dispatched her most trusted forces to bring them home. Over the next hour, as the Vexari ship carefully maneuvered to dock with the Determination, Marcus learned the full story of what had happened since he last saw the children's holographic message. The rebellion that had driven the royal family into exile had been decisively defeated. The Empress had not only reclaimed her throne, but had also exposed the rebels' crimes against civilian populations throughout the empire. The war was over, and the children were no longer refugees. They were going home. As preparations began for the transfer, Zira approached Marcus with an expression of solemn gratitude. She spoke at length in her own language, with one of the Vexari officers translating for the humans present. "Her Highness wishes to express the debt that the royal family owes to you," the officer explained. "You protected the heirs to the throne when they were most vulnerable, asking nothing in return. The Empress has instructed us to offer you any reward within our power to grant." Marcus looked at the 7 children who had trusted him with their lives, and he realized that he didn't want any reward. The satisfaction of knowing they were safe was enough. But Zira wasn't finished speaking. "Her Highness also wishes to inform you that your actions have been recorded in the imperial histories," the translator continued. "The story of the human who fed the royal children will be told for generations to come. You have become part of the legend of how the Vexari Empire was preserved during its darkest hour." As the children prepared to board their rescue ship, each of them approached Marcus individually to say goodbye. Little Kef, the youngest, clung to him for several minutes, making soft sounds that needed no translation. The child didn't want to leave the human who had bandaged his wounds and made sure he never went hungry. When Zira's turn came, she did something that surprised everyone present. She removed a small medallion from around her neck and placed it in Marcus's hands. Through the translator, she explained that it was her personal seal, the symbol of her status as heir to the throne. By giving it to him, she was making him an honorary member of the royal family, with all the privileges and protections that status entailed. "Wherever you go in the galaxy," she said, "you will be recognized as a friend of the Vexari Empire. Our ships will aid you, our worlds will welcome you, and our people will honor you as one who showed kindness when kindness was the rarest treasure in the universe." As the children boarded their ship, Marcus felt a complex mixture of pride and loss. He had accomplished something extraordinary, but he was also saying goodbye to 7 remarkable beings who had changed his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. Captain Torres placed a hand on his shoulder as they watched the Vexari vessel prepare to depart. "You know," she said quietly, "most people spend their whole lives wondering if they've ever really made a difference. You just saved an empire." The alien ship began to move away, but before it entered hyperspace, it transmitted one final message. It was a recording from the Empress herself, her face appearing on the main display with the same regal bearing Marcus had seen in the hidden hologram. "Marcus Chen of Earth," she said, "your name will be remembered among the greatest heroes of the Vexari people. You have shown us that the universe still contains beings of pure heart who will protect the innocent simply because it is right to do so. When the histories of this era are written, they will speak not only of battles won and territories reclaimed, but of a simple human who cooked lunch every day for 7 hungry children and, in doing so, preserved the future of our civilization." As the ship vanished into hyperspace, carrying the children back to lives of safety and privilege they had never expected to see again, Marcus stood on the bridge of the Determination and realized that his own life had been forever changed. He was no longer just a humanitarian aid worker. He was a friend of the Vexari Empire, a protector of the innocent, and proof that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can have consequences that ripple across the galaxy. The metallic artifact that Zira had originally given him now rested beside her personal seal in his quarters, 2 symbols of a trust that had transformed 7 homeless children into the rightful rulers of one of the most powerful civilizations in known space, and all because a human from Earth had believed that feeding hungry children was more important than asking questions about their past. 2 years had passed since Marcus last saw the Vexari children, and his life had taken a direction he never could have imagined. The story of the human who protected the royal heirs had spread throughout the galaxy, making him something of a celebrity in diplomatic circles. More importantly, it had opened doors for humanitarian work on a scale he had never dreamed possible. The Vexari Empire had been generous with their gratitude. They had funded the establishment of the Chen Foundation, a galaxy-wide organization dedicated to providing aid to refugees and displaced populations. Marcus now commanded resources that could feed millions and provide medical care to entire star systems in crisis. But despite his success, he often found himself thinking about 7 children and wondering how they were adapting to their return to imperial life. The question was answered unexpectedly when his personal communication array activated with a familiar harmonic signature. Zira's face appeared on the display, but she was no longer the frightened child he remembered. At 14, she had grown into her role as crown princess, bearing herself with natural authority while retaining the kindness that had made her protect the younger children during their time in exile. She wore the formal regalia of her station, but her smile was the same one that had greeted him every day at noon behind that warehouse on Kepler Station. "Marcus," she said, speaking fluent Standard now, "I hope this message finds you well. I wanted you to be the first to know that Mother has decided it is time for us to take more active roles in governing the Empire. Next week I will be formally invested as Crown Princess and Heir Apparent." Marcus felt a surge of pride. The little girl who had shared her meager possessions with hungry siblings was about to become one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. "But that's not the only reason I'm calling," Zira continued. "We have a request to make of you if you're willing to consider it." The display expanded to show all 7 of the children, now grown into impressive young people. Little Kef, who had once clung to Marcus's leg, was now a confident 11-year-old studying advanced mathematics and stellar engineering. The others had similarly thrived, developing into individuals who would clearly serve their people well in the years to come. "The Empire is planning to establish new protocols for humanitarian aid throughout our territory," Zira explained. "We want to create a system that ensures no child ever has to experience what we went through. But we need someone to oversee the program, someone who understands what it means to help people simply because they need help." Marcus realized where this was leading, and his heart began to race. "We're offering you the position of Imperial Humanitarian Coordinator," Zira said. "You would have authority over relief efforts across 300 star systems, with unlimited resources and the full backing of the Imperial fleet. You could help millions of people, Marcus, billions even." The offer was everything Marcus had ever wanted, but it came with implications that made him pause. Accepting would mean leaving human space permanently, becoming part of an alien government, and taking responsibility for humanitarian efforts on a scale that dwarfed anything he had ever attempted. "I know it's a big decision," Zira said, seeming to read his thoughts across the vast distance between them, "but I want you to know something. Every day for the past 2 years we have started our morning meal by remembering the human who made sure we never went hungry. Every policy we've influenced, every decision we've helped Mother make, has been guided by the lessons you taught us about the importance of caring for those who have nothing." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the same harmonic quality as her mother's formal pronouncements. "You didn't just feed us, Marcus. You showed us what it means to be worthy of the power we were born to wield. The Empire is stronger because of you, and now we want to offer you the chance to make it stronger." Still, the transmission ended with coordinates for a rendezvous, point near the edge of Vexari space, and a promise that Marcus would have as much time as he needed to consider the offer. But as he sat in his quarters aboard the Determination, now permanently assigned to his Foundation's work, Marcus realized that the decision had already been made. He had spent his entire adult life helping people in need, moving from crisis to crisis and doing what he could with limited resources. The Vexari were offering him the chance to institutionalize that work, to create systems that would prevent suffering rather than simply responding to it. More than that, they were offering him the chance to continue the relationship that had begun when 7 hungry children trusted a stranger with their lives. He had watched them grow up through occasional messages and reports, celebrating their achievements and worrying about their challenges. The thought of working alongside them as they took on the responsibilities of leadership was deeply appealing. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood on the bridge of a Vexari flagship as it approached the Imperial capital. The planet below was a jewel of silver and blue, with cities that seemed to grow organically from the landscape and orbital installations that looked more like art than engineering. Zira met him at the spaceport, no longer the frightened child from Kepler Station, but unmistakably the same person who had shared her food with the younger children and insisted that Marcus keep the genetic artifact that proved their identity. She embraced him with genuine affection before stepping back to present him to the honor guard that had assembled for his arrival. "Allow me to present Marcus Chen of Earth," she announced formally, "protector of the Imperial heirs, friend of the Vexari Empire, and the newest member of our government." As they traveled toward the Imperial Palace, Zira explained how much the Empire had changed since the children's return. The experience of exile had profoundly influenced their perspective on governance, leading to reforms that prioritized the welfare of ordinary citizens over the traditional concerns of imperial politics. "Mother," Says we rule differently now because we remember what it feels like to be powerless, Zira said. Every law we pass, every program we fund, we ask ourselves, would this have helped us when we were hiding in abandoned buildings and depending on the kindness of strangers? The palace was magnificent beyond description, but what impressed Marcus most was how accessible it seemed. Unlike the forbidding fortresses he had expected, the imperial residence was designed to welcome visitors and facilitate communication between the rulers and their people. That evening, Marcus dined with the Empress and all 7 of her children for the first time. The woman he had seen only in holograms was even more impressive in person, radiating the kind of authority that came from centuries of experience. But when she looked at Marcus, her expression softened with genuine gratitude. "I have waited 2 years to thank you properly," she said. "You saved not only my children but the future of our civilization. Tonight we begin to repay that debt by putting the power of an empire at the service of the same values you demonstrated on a forgotten station at the edge of nowhere." As the meal progressed, Marcus listened to the children, now young adults, discuss their various projects and responsibilities. Each of them had chosen to focus on areas that would directly benefit the empire's most vulnerable citizens. They had become exactly the kind of leaders their experience in exile had prepared them to be. When the formal dinner ended, Zira walked with Marcus through the palace gardens, showing him the memorial that had been erected to commemorate their time on Kepler Station. At its center was a simple plaque with an inscription in both Vexari and Standard. "In memory of the kindness of strangers, and in honor of those who protect the innocent without thought of reward." "Tomorrow," Zira said, "you'll take the oath as Imperial Humanitarian Coordinator. But tonight I wanted to thank you one more time as just Zira, the girl whose life you saved by sharing your lunch." Marcus looked up at the alien stars above the Imperial capital and realized that his journey had come full circle. He had begun by feeding 7 hungry children, and now he would spend the rest of his life ensuring that no child in Vexari space would ever go hungry again. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness really could change the galaxy. 5 years after taking his oath as Imperial Humanitarian Coordinator, Marcus stood before the Galactic Council presenting the annual report on refugee assistance throughout Vexari space. The numbers were staggering. 15 million people relocated to safety, 43 worlds provided with emergency aid, and over 300 permanent relief stations established in previously underserved systems. But for Marcus, the most meaningful statistic was the simplest one. 0 children had died of starvation in Vexari territory during his tenure. Not one. The presentation concluded to respectful applause from the assembled representatives of dozens of species. As Marcus gathered his materials, he noticed that several delegates were approaching with obvious intent to speak with him privately. The Vexari reputation for effective humanitarian work had attracted attention throughout the galaxy, and other governments were beginning to request assistance in establishing similar programs. After the session ended, Marcus found himself in the familiar position of being more famous than he was comfortable with. The story of the human who had unknowingly saved an empire by feeding hungry children had become legend, inspiring humanitarian workers throughout known space and serving as a symbol of the difference that individual compassion could make. As he prepared to return to his quarters, a communication arrived that made everything else fade into insignificance. Zira's image appeared on his personal display, but her expression was troubled in a way he hadn't seen since their time on Kepler Station. "Marcus," she said without preamble, "we need you back at the capital immediately. Something has happened that requires your specific expertise." The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. Within hours, Marcus was aboard the fastest courier ship in the Vexari fleet, racing toward the Imperial homeworld at maximum hyperspace velocity. During the journey, he received fragmentary updates that painted a disturbing picture. A previously unknown species called the hegemony had emerged from the galactic rim, conquering systems with ruthless efficiency. Their technology was advanced beyond anything the known civilizations possessed, and their military tactics suggested a complete disregard for civilian casualties. Refugee streams were flooding into Vexari space as entire worlds fell to the invaders. But what made the situation truly dire was the hegemony's apparent policy toward captured populations. Intelligence reports suggested they were systematically separating children from their families and transporting them to unknown, locations for purposes that no one wanted to contemplate. When Marcus arrived at the imperial capital, he found the palace transformed into a war council chamber. Military advisors, diplomatic envoys, and intelligence analysts worked around the clock to coordinate the Empire's response to the crisis. At the center of it all was Zira, now 20, and bearing the full weight of her role as crown princess. "The situation is worse than our initial reports indicated," she explained as she led Marcus to a secure briefing room. "The hegemony isn't just conquering worlds, they're harvesting populations. We estimate that over 2 million children have been taken from the systems they've occupied." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. After years of ensuring that no child in Vexari space went hungry, he was now faced with the nightmare scenario of millions of children torn from their families and subjected to unknown horrors. "What does the Empress plan to do?" he asked. Zira's expression hardened with determination that reminded him powerfully of her mother. "We're going to war," she said simply, "but not the kind of war the hegemony expects." Over the next several hours, Marcus learned about the most ambitious rescue operation in galactic history. The Vexari Empire was mobilizing not just its military forces, but its entire humanitarian infrastructure. Every relief ship, every medical facility, every resource that Marcus had helped build over the past 5 years was being redirected toward a single goal: rescuing the captured children and providing them with safety, care, and eventual reunification with their families. "This is why we needed you," Zira explained. "The military can win battles, but only you understand how to care for traumatized children on this scale. We're talking about potentially millions of victims representing dozens of species, many of whom will require specialized care that we've never had to provide before." The magnitude of the challenge was overwhelming, but Marcus found himself energized by the clarity of purpose. This was what he had spent his entire career preparing for, even if he had never imagined it would be on such a massive scale. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Everything," Zira replied. "We need you to design and oversee the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history. We need you to coordinate with military forces to ensure that rescue operations prioritize the safety of the children above strategic considerations. Most importantly, we need you to do what you've always done. Make sure that no child goes hungry, no wound goes untreated, and no frightened little one faces the darkness alone." As they spoke, the other 6 siblings arrived to join the planning session. Kef, now 16 and serving as the Empire's youngest logistics coordinator, had already begun calculating the resources that would be required. The others had each contributed their own expertise to different aspects of the operation. Looking at these 7 remarkable individuals, Marcus was struck by how perfectly their experiences had prepared them for this moment. They understood what it meant to be separated from family, to be hungry and afraid, to depend on the kindness of strangers for survival. That understanding would guide every decision they made in the coming months. "There's something else," Zira said as the briefing concluded. "The hegemony has been monitoring our communications. They know about our humanitarian reputation, and they've specifically mentioned you in their intelligence reports. They see your work as a threat to their operations." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. "What kind of threat?" "The kind that comes from showing people that there's an alternative to their way of doing things," Zira replied. "You've proven that it's possible to govern through compassion rather than fear, to build strength through kindness rather than conquest. That's exactly the opposite of everything the hegemony represents." As Marcus prepared to begin the most important work of his life, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this point. A simple decision to feed hungry children had led him to the center of galactic politics, and now that same impulse to protect the innocent was about to drive the largest rescue operation in history. The hegemony had made a critical error in judgment. They had attacked a civilization that understood the true source of strength in the universe, not the power to destroy, but the courage to protect those who could not protect themselves. They were about to learn that an empire built on compassion was far more formidable than any force built on fear. In the weeks that followed, as Vexari fleets moved to engage the enemy, and Marcus coordinated relief efforts across multiple star systems, the galaxy would witness something unprecedented, not just a military victory, but a demonstration that the values Marcus had shown on Kepler Station, feeding lunch to 7 hungry children, could indeed change the course of civilizations. The human who had once cooked soup in a makeshift kitchen was about to lead an empire in teaching the galaxy that kindness, when backed by sufficient determination and resources, was the most powerful force in the universe.